and welcome to another episode of the Turn Up For What podcast, talking your Houston Texans straight from the Great British Isles. And the season is pretty much here, or as close as it can get this time of year. We've even got a game coming up this Saturday, the visit in New Orleans, and we've also got a visit of a returning guest, Mr. Jordan Pun. Texans thoughts. Jordan, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Ewan. It's always great talking ball with you. I'm super excited for the season to begin. Let's get into it.
That's it. And what's your new title now? Texans Wire. What you doing? Still doing YouTube? What's the setup now that you've finished college?
Yeah, finished college, graduated in May, took some time to travel over the summer, and now I am writing for the Texans Wire over at USA Today. Still doing YouTube, still doing the podcast with Believe and Quentin Demps. So yeah, just trying to juggle a bunch of things and see what comes of it. No,
that's cool, man. That's it. Living the dream. I think that's if you can do this full time. Then that's the ideal. And the trip around Europe was good. What was your favourite place?
So I spent 2 weeks in Italy, and then I got stranded in France for a day because my connection flight was delayed. And so I got stuck there overnight. They put me up in a hotel. I had like about 12 to 14 hours in Paris, got to explore a little bit. So it was a cool city, but definitely I loved Italy, man. I think like the whole like Tuscany region there, like doing the wine tours up there. Oh my gosh, amazing, man, amazing.
Yeah, you find out you've been eating pasta wrong your whole life. I think when you go to Italy, I think that's definitely. That's a big part of it. But yeah, and we've got some football to talk about this weekend. But first of all, we've got, I suppose, some camp reports, and I think, how do you? I suppose the training camp. I know you always say the film don't lie, and I suppose they're not real situations. They're 7-on-9, 7-on-7s. They're limited in terms of their transfer ability to games and whatnot, but it's certainly fun to watch it and see what's going on, try and get an idea for the team. But of any of the reports that you've seen, is there any stuck out to you that you've kind of really noted down, or people that have affirmed your expectations going into the season?
I think that's what it really comes down to, Ewan. You said it perfectly. Like, I feel like the film is number one, what takes priority. And then these training camp reports can help affirm what we've seen on film, whether that's college film with rookies, guys showing out like Jalen Petrie and Dameon Pierce. Those have been kind of the two biggest names right now that are getting a lot of praise, whether it's from teammates or coaches or whatever it may be. So those are kind of reaffirming, what I saw on college tape, that, Jalen Petrie, he's got a nose for the football, right? He's already got 3 interceptions in training camp. So to me, boom, that's checking off a box. Like, it shows, okay, this is starting to translate to practices now. We saw it in games in college. Next step is practices in the NFL. Next step is preseason. Next step is regular season. So it's really this long checklist before we got to say that, hey, like Jalen Petrie, he's going to be certified baller in the NFL. So there's some things you can take stock into it. But then for the most part, like you said, you want to see those game reps. And we're getting closer and closer to that.
Yeah, I think so. And I suppose there's certain things you see. You're like, Derek Stingley's the best corner on the team. If I can hope so, because you took him third overall. Jalen Petrie has got a nose for the football. You saw that, and the versatility of his role at Baylor. So it's good to see these picks that, hopefully, because we're going to have to ask them to contribute early and contribute in a way that's going to help the team if this is going to be a better season than the season prior. So you hope these guys can come in and find their way. But the big issue is you got Kenyon Green, who Lovie Smith basically admitted is not in game shape because he's had an operation. Yeah. He's now missing time. Christian Harris, who is a converted safety, still learning the linebacker position. So what's your take on it being, how imperative is it for rookies not to miss time? And when they do, what they got to do to try and catch up, because the gulf is already massive, so this only sets them back further.
Yeah, it's not really what people want to hear, but it is absolutely true, your point, that it can be a big kind of roadblock and deterrence for rookies, because like you said, the gap is already so big mentally and physically. Most of these guys, like, they're in like college shape, good enough to get by, whether it's in the SEC or whatever division that they were in. But I can tell you, as a recent college graduate, like, there's no way my body would be ready for NFL athletes. And I don't play football. Like, I'm in a different tier from these players like Kenyon Green and whatnot. But I can just tell, like, as a 22, 23-year-old, like, I can't imagine having to go up against grown men bodies like that. So having that injury, like you mentioned with Kenyon Green, it will be a bit of a deterrence to his rookie season, in my opinion. We've seen stuff like that last year with Nico Collins. He seemed like he was building up some sort of confidence, and then the injury happens and it kind of just derails everything. So it's having it even earlier now in training camp, for me, can be even more detrimental, in my opinion, because right now it's all about like laying the foundation and the groundwork, so you can keep building up on it and stacking these days. And if you're already kind of knocking out that foundation, it's tough. So I'm still optimistic about Kenyon Green in the long term, but as a rookie, might be a bit slower than we'd hope. Hey, that's the great thing about having 2 first-round picks.
Well, let's say hopefully one of them's going to pay off. I think with the thing with Ken, we needed him this year to come in and be the engine of the team and be the biggest probably supporting or leading board that Mills can have is an improved running game. And I think Kenyon potentially on his college tape in the SEC stood to be potentially the best run blocker on this line in terms of a power scheme, albeit the Aggies last year under Jimbo Fisher, they did run a lot of zone, and it's not a wholly transferable body of work he's got in college, but certainly he was versatile, and you hoped he would come in and really kind of change the mentality of this line, because there was some run blocking that he showed on tape that was nasty. And I think it's got the potential to set the running game back early in the season, but it's also got the potential to save Max Sharpen's career if he can come back in at left guard. I mean, I'm not expecting big things, but if he can become solid and hold the position down for a number of weeks until they feel Kenyon's ready, and because the bye week's early this year, that may be before the trip to Vegas. But I think there's certainly points to be considered, and you see it all the time. Rookies, when they miss time in their first year, they don't necessarily reach their potential. And I think it's definitely for both those guys, more so for Kenyon because we really needed him. Christian's got time. There's guys sitting in front of him that can play, and you can blend them in as time goes. But certainly it's a bit of a concern. But yeah, it's bubbling nicely. But this week myself and John are going to talk about the defense predominantly, and try and just kind of flesh that out, what we're expecting. And obviously we've got some games to kind of see some of that. It will be vanilla, but it won't be till week 1 against the Colts we see this in its truest fashion. But first of all, Lovie scheme, he comes back. Jordan, what do you think of him being the head coach but also having DC playing play calling duties on a Sunday? Do you think, how doable is it, and do you think there's any drawbacks to that? He's certainly very bullish and adamant that it's not an issue, but how do you see it?
I definitely think there's its positives and its negatives. I think him being the head coach and the DC now is going to make it's so much easier for players to buy in to who he is as a person, who he is as a leader, as a head coach, his system, and all those good things. Because as we saw last year, just with David Culley, I mean, I don't know how it's just night and day in terms of the resumes that those two guys have. So of course it's going to be so much easier to buy into a guy like Lovie Smith. So I think that's the positives of him being head coach DC. But then, like you said, there are drawbacks. There's just more on your plate. There's way more duties now on Lovie Smith's shoulders. We saw it in years prior with Bill O'Brien, OC head coach. There's a lot on the plate. He wasn't able to fully, be fully connected into the offensive duties that are necessary of an offensive coordinator. And so I think it will make it more challenging for Lovie Smith, especially when he needs to diversify his defense. He needs to stop playing Tampa 2 over 50% of the time. He needs to start disguising his coverages. He needs to start blitzing more. There's a lot of schematic things that he needs to do, and he might not have the time to do so now that he is head coach as well. So a lot of it kind of lays on his son, Miles Smith. I'm sure Lovie is grooming Miles to be a DC in the future. And if Miles can take that step forward with those specific schematic adjustments that I mentioned, then maybe those drawbacks aren't as detrimental. That's
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair point. He said when he got announced back in the earlier in the off season that it wasn't an issue. Offensive guys do it all the time, but I made a note of it. Bruce Cabina asked him about will he have help from upstairs, and he got a little bit chippy about it. And I think he certainly wants to show that he can do both, and it's not necessarily an impediment to his play calling. But I think ultimately, and you wrote about the Tampa 2 system with in the Texans wire earlier in the off season, and I thought it was interesting some of the points you made. We'll try and go through it a little bit in terms of that sense. But what do you what do you view? I mean, I suppose the biggest knock on the system, or why it's worked so well in the past, they had elite talent when he was in Chicago. That's what took him to the Super Bowl. Definitely, that's not the case here this season, and it may take a number of years to get there. So with the sort of addition of Stingley, who's predominantly a man cover corner, with Petrie, who's obviously a very flexible kind of piece on the back end, do you expect this to change dramatically right from week one? Because my biggest criticism was, I remember watching the Thursday night football Carolina last year, and the holes in the zone were so wide open. It could have got beat by any offense that night, and I didn't know if that was just a rigidness or sticking to his principles, whatever you want to call it. But as the season progressed last year, he showed a greater level of flexibility. So with these pieces, do you think he's already kind of on that path, and that was why he wanted these guys, or how do you see it? What's your expectations in terms of sort of coverage complexity? Moreover,
I think in terms of like him being on that path, I don't think it was necessarily a Lovie decision to go with Stingley, Petrie, and that. I think it's a Nick Caserio decision. But I think Lovie is a guy who is adaptable enough that if you give him those types of guys and he talks with Nick and they get aligned on the right vision, that he can adjust and make those adjustments into a team that plays more man coverage, into a team that plays maybe with more single high safeties, drop Petrie into the box, blitz guys like Petrie and Christian Harris more, and really go away from everything that Lovie has been comfortable with his entire career. I think it's possible, but to your point, I am more pessimistic about that happening right from week one. Number one, because we already saw last year how he will stick with what he's comfortable in the beginning of the season, and then second half of the season, then he'll adjust. And number two, these guys that we're talking about to be the guys that change his scheme in terms of Stingley and Petrie, yes, we see them as like kind of building blocks, cornerstones, faces of the franchise, whatever you want to call them. But at the end of the day, they're rookies. Right. And so if they were veterans that had proven, production and resumes at the NFL level, then of course, yeah, you from week one, you better tailor your scheme to them. But because it's rookies, there's already that learning curve that we talked about earlier. And so it might take them a little bit longer to get to that point where they can fully execute the scheme to how Lovie wants it, whether that's Tampa 2 or whether that's his adjustment. So I think we'll see it starting around maybe after the bye. That's when we'll really start to see it get diversified. But in the beginning, I would not be surprised if it's still pretty Tampa 2 heavy.
Do you think this personnel has improved enough to influence games? Because last year, even playing some of its best ball, you would argue that a lot of the games were handed to them. We'll come over to turnovers, and turnovers one of the biggest reasons. But in terms of a raw talent point of view, has this improved enough to say try and win you 2 or 3 games that you may not otherwise if you didn't have the talent improvement?
That's a really tough question. I would say maybe improve by 1 game, but I wouldn't say it's substantial enough to 2 to 3 games, because that's honestly a big jump. Like usually those types of games in terms of like wins added are reserved for like your Pro Bowls, all pro type of players. And we didn't add any of those, right? I like the additions we made in terms of veterans on the defensive line with Jerry Hughes, Mario Addison, Rasheem Green. But then the other guys are rookies, right? In terms of Stingley and Petrie and whatnot. And so those are always going to be a little tougher to predict how they add up to more wins, no matter how high I am on Petrie. So I would say they maybe added enough talent to win 1 extra game just purely based off the defense.
Yeah, because I kind of look at it as like Rashad Green is probably better than DeMarcus Walker, particularly from an internal rush point of view. Yeah. Walker got bowled over too many times and it was a clear weakness. I think I know he was your guy, but Jacob Martin, he didn't get consistent enough in the run game. So is Okoronkwo better than him as a speed rusher on the edge? Potentially, we don't know. Time will tell. But I think Steven Nelson is an upgrade on Terrence Mitchell. I think that that there's some iterative improvements, but when you go from say the 4th echelon, kind of the bottom rung of talent, to the the second or one of the mid tiers, does that translate into game wrecking contributions from these guys? Potentially not, but you never know. Some of them might surprise us, I suppose. But in terms of the bit I've talked about a lot this off season, and probably want to lean into some of the more schematics of Lovie's historical play calling, but very much he only likes to rush 4. That doesn't really bring that much external or second and third level pressure up front. He did do it at times last year, but it's not a regular feature like a Wink Martindale or somebody of that ilk that really likes to bring the house all the time, or Spagnuolo in Kansas City. So is there Do you think the talent up front is going to be enough to do it? The reports of Mario Addison have been great. The same with Jerry Hughes, veterans, but you just don't know. When it's not live bullets flying, is that a real reflection of where they are at this stage of their career? Older players who've been around. The pass rush, is it going to be enough when this scheme is so reliant on four guys getting home all the time?
Yeah, it's a tough question to say. I think I have confidence in the veterans being able to produce. Like, not one of them is going to give you a double-digit sack season, but between two guys, between Jerry Hughes and Mario Addison, and you might get 9 there, you might get 10 there. Between Rasheem Green and Ogbonnia Okoronkwo, you might get another maybe 5 or so, say. And so they're really going to take this by committee approach. We saw it last year with Lovie, how he wants to rotate 8 guys really at those 4 defensive line positions. And so it'll come down to those edge rushers, those veteran edge rushers by committee. And it'll come down to Malik Collins really getting home on his sacks. He had a good amount of pressures last year, but he was never really able to finish it. And when he did, he got roughed from the freaking passer calls all the time. It was crazy. So it'll come down to Malik Collins taking that step, adding some more sacks. And then the main man on that D line, in terms of a youth perspective, Jonathan Grenard, right? Can he build off of his performance of 8 sacks in 12 games? It was a really interesting season for him because, he wasn't a guy to get a lot of pressures and to consistently get home to the quarterback. He was more of a guy that when he did get home, when he did get past his man, like, he was going to finish the sack for sure. And there would be some coverage sacks, some cleanup sacks on stunts and whatnot. So he needs to take that next step for this pass rush to be able to do what Lovie Smith wants them to do and just rush forward rather than blitzing. It's really on Grenard's shoulders to become that double-digit sack guy. And I don't know. I want to see some more game reps before I'm very confident in making that prediction of whether he can do it or not.
Yeah, I think that might. I've had the feeling off season, and I'm still yet to be convinced, and obviously want to be convinced. But I think that part of the team may well underwhelm people this year, and it might be raise its head. And look, it is the number one premium position apart from quarterback. If you can get home up front, you influence games, and you create pressure, and you create turnovers, etc. And I think that's the thing. If you look at Jonathan Grenard, a lot of people are putting a lot of expectations on him, and I think similar to Davis Mills in some way, based on his tape alone, it's perhaps unfair, because if you look at the pure win rate, or whatever Brandon Thorne calls it, where he analyses every sack as a high quality win, does he go past the edge, does he bend the edge and get round in the tackle and barely puts hands on him? Now, Grenard's got some great handwork. He's got that kind of pull and push move that he kind of does, and he uses that to great effect. And actually, if you watch a number of his sacks, how he kind of gets free from the tacklers is through that. And his hand fighting throughout the season last year really worked, well, and you could see an improvement on that. So he's going to have to take a huge step in that, because I don't think he's a true edge bender to get around the edge. So and really kind of get low like a Von Miller. These are kind of elite guys. So yeah, there's a lot to be decided there up front. But look, I think there's definitely more guys who can influence the game and not get caught out in the run game. And I think if you can be solid in the run game and get home enough, on third down, etc., it'll be a case. Now, in your article, John, you looked at a big part of the turnovers. Do you want to just kind of talk us through that article and just how the pressures and everything up front, can relate to turnovers and how much this team relied on them this year? Because it's easy to forget great plays, exciting, but this team was heavily reliant on that, and I think it's something you can't always guarantee.
Yeah, definitely. So I wanted to take a look at basically every single turnover that the Texans defense forced last year, because it was the driving factor to their success. They really weren't that good of a defense by all measures of eye test and statistics other than turnovers, but they were able to force the 8th, I don't know why I put up 5 fingers, the 8th most turnovers in the interceptions in the NFL, right? So that was the first part I wanted to look at. I was going to look at interceptions. I just finished up my fumbles one, and then I'll look at turnovers and downs later. But yeah, so in terms of the interceptions, I wanted to see, how we were able to force them, whether it was something Lovie Smith did with his scheme, with the Tampa 2, whether it was because of how the Tampa 2 allows their defensive linemen to play faster, get off the ball, prioritize getting upfield, and maybe that led to pressures, and how pressures can lead to interceptions, because pressures will push quarterbacks, around the pocket, force them to navigate, force them to speed up their decision-making process, maybe worsen their mechanics and whatnot. So typically, historically, the more pressures you can get as a defense will lead to more interceptions. But the Texans, I need to pull up the exact stats on it, but they were, I'm pretty sure, a bottom 5 team in pressures. And so we didn't really see that. Am I right on that? Or do you know the exact?
Yeah, I'm sure you had third least in the league last year, which rang a bell as soon as I read it. So I think, bottom 5 anyway in pressures up front. Yeah.
There you go. So it didn't translate. What I was hoping to see is Lovie's, philosophy translate to some more pressures, but it didn't. Third least in the league. I would say that it's not even necessarily a Lovie problem. It's more so just a talent problem or lack thereof. So we didn't see those pressures lead to interceptions. And so what I did figure out is that a good chunk of our interceptions, over 50% of them, were basically due to unforced errors. Like, it wasn't us getting pressure on the quarterback, forcing him out the pocket and making a bad throw. There were a few of those, but for the bigger portion of our interceptions, it was, quarterbacks just making a bad read, miscommunicating with a wide receiver on a route, just being blatantly inaccurate on like an otherwise easy and open throw. And so those are unforced errors that you basically chalk up to luck, right? That's not going to happen all the time. A quarterback's not going to just miss a slant route 9 times out of 10. He's not going to do that. And so because of that luck is a very volatile concept, and it can change and go higher, go lower each year. And so because we had so much luck last year that helped us generate the 8th most interceptions in the NFL, there's good odds that luck is going to swing back down towards the median, and we aren't going to be as lucky and have so many of those unforced errors. So what I kind of concluded in my article is that to offset that drop in lucky interceptions, we would need to generate more pressure to get those forced interceptions. And so that comes down to, do you believe that we can generate more pressure? Do you believe in this veteran defensive line additions? Do you believe in Jonathan Grenard? And then also, do you believe in Lovie Smith blitzing more to create that pressure himself? Because there's the natural pressure from rushing 4, and then there's the scheme pressure from blitzing, simulated pressures, whatever you want to call them. So that's kind of what the article was looking at, and my findings as well.
Yeah, and I think you're right. And I think there's in that. And when I read it, I thought, well, that actually resonated with what I remember seeing. If you think of the win in Nashville, Tannehill sailed a few in wet conditions. Mm-hmm. You think of just a complete anomaly in Miami. And all these games. If you think of week 2 in Cleveland, when Schwartz cuts off his route and Justin Reed just comes in and takes basically a free one. So yeah, there did seem to be a lot of that. And even and we started the season so heavily in week 1 against Jacksonville, and which was by far the biggest win of the season, and that was because we got 3 gimmies, it felt like at times. So yeah, I think it's a huge determining factor on the quality and the ability of this defense to keep the offense in games this year, because as you said, you can't rely on it. So we'll have to kind of shore up and get better in certain areas, particularly the pass rush. But I think an element of this defense, which I'm just not sure about looking at the roster on paper, John, is our ability to defend the run. Because I was going through some clips. If you look at when we went against those elite units last year, like Cleveland that run the ball, okay, they are the pinnacle of it, or certainly were last year. We're going to play Philadelphia on Thursday Night Football. They were number 1 in yards and rush per attempt. So the inability to run the ball puts so much pressure on all the other levels of the defense, particularly in this scheme when you've got 3 linebackers who are predominantly space eaters rather than downhill thumpers. So where do you see this team's run defense in 2022? Do you think it's going to be enough, and do you think it's going to improve from last year?
I think it'll marginally improve, but if you think about the additions that we've made, like Rasheem Green, Mario Addison, and Jerry Hughes, those guys are the guys I'm just going to keep naming. Steven Nelson, obviously, of course, but we're talking about run defense here. So those 3 defensive ends, like, they're not really known for the run defense. They're not really big edge setters in that regard. So I think that's kind of a wash, maybe a marginal improvement over Jacob Martin and who else did we even play on the edge last year? Was Whitney Merciless still getting snaps early in the year? I feel like
he was till he got cut. Yeah.
So I would say there's a marginal improvement there, but I don't know. It's going to take us out of like the bottom 5. Like maybe we'll still be a bottom 10 team, maybe not just a bottom 5 team, because of improvements with Grenard and Roy Lopez and whoever that third linebacker may be, whether it's Christian Harris or Garrett Wallow. But I would still predict that we are a bottom 10 defense in terms of run defense. The only thing that would really change it for me is if we start playing more single high safeties, which would mean we drop the other safety into the box. And so you start to have that numbers advantage in the box. Because right now, from what we saw last year, Lovie Smith playing a lot of Tampa 2, a lot of 2 deep safeties. That means you've only got, 7 defenders in the box.
Well, that's it, and I think it's probably one of the easiest kind of, if you're going to make a check at the line, you see 2 guys sitting, deep in the field, or or covering 2 halves of the field, 10-15 yards away from the line of scrimmage when you only need to make 8. Then it's an easy check to the run at times if you're not willing to show that you're going to come and sell out to beat the run. So, and I think that's definitely something that Lovie stays away from. But I think there's definitely a tendency, and Wade Smith had this as well, an older school coaches, just not to get beat deep. Rack was the same. Just don't get beat deep, and take everything they give in front of you. So, we'll probably still see that mentality in the defense. We'll kind of run through some of the guys that we expect or we don't expect to make the roster, I think. But I think predominantly that most of, assuming they keep 25, Jordan, on the defensive side of the ball, I think it was pretty easy for me to kind of get those 25 names, and we'll kind of go through them reasonably quickly, kind of top line. We don't want to go through every single 25 of those guys, but I think the defensive line is probably going to be the toughest cut, I think, because you've got guys around the edges. Kurt Heinisch that's come out of Notre Dame, just a captain, record number of appearances for a big Power 5, or independent, but for a big program, and you've got Michael Dwemefor, who I thought flashed, and he shows short area quickness. He's something is something that Caserio always references, so I think he's going to be in the mix. And Deontay Harris showed some flashes at the end last year as well, so I have them going with 9 because, well, in any other year or any other team, if he wasn't such a premium pick and the conditions that he came in, I think it might be a question if Blacklock makes it, but certainly it sounds like he's flashed a bit more in that. And I think you've got to keep Okoronkwo because he's a speed rusher. Booker's your draft pick. You've got Hughes and Addison. You've got Lopez and Collins as you're starting in 2 interior guys, and you've got Green and Grenard. So that takes you to 9. I think that's probably the toughest cut of or the most competitive spot, just with the way this scheme's set up, because you've not got defensive ends, those tackles, and kind of in the true 3-4 sense that we've been used to. Is there any guys in there you think might make it, or are you on board with those guys?
No, I'm 100% with you. I think we got a good blend of vets and young guys there. And I would love to see Michael Dwemefor make the roster. I liked what I saw to Damian Daniels, rookie out of Nebraska, in terms of his college tape, but I think you got the right 9 there. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's probably, and you might see a case where you keep Heinisch and you keep Daniels on the practice squad because it's extended again this year after COVID, and clubs seem to like that. I think it's, and you don't want to see any of your draft picks go, but any of these guys that have been undrafted free agents, teams are out there, and so there might be some tactical stashes there, because all it takes is a couple of reports online and teams get aware of it, and it starts to get a bit technical and tactical in terms of the front office shuffling. I think the safeties almost pick itself. I think Petrie, Murray Owens and Terrence Brooks are kind of round off 4 if you keep 4. Would you agree with that?
I'll pull up the safeties. But yes, I would definitely say, what did we say? We said Eric Murray, Jonathan Owens, Jalen Petrie. Who's the 4th?
Terrence Brooks.
Yeah, okay. I've heard some decent things about Terrence Brooks. Like, the other guys aren't really...
Well, I mean, you probably remember from last year in Indianapolis, which was one of our worst games, for who just ran by that safety, because he certainly I don't think he's a starting caliber player. I think he's here for his special teams, but I think that's the trouble, isn't it? Until we get to New Orleans on to the game against New Orleans this weekend, I don't think you get a good feel for who's actually going to be in the first team unit in special teams. And obviously, in training camp, there's a lot of trial and error and a lot of practice there. The cornerback group, I think, gets a little bit interesting, because you've got your top 3 guys in Stingley, Nelson and King. But then after that, obviously you've got MJ Stewart comes in, who's going to be a kind of slot guy, can play depending on your formation. And then obviously Tavier Thomas kind of flashed. I think people are a little bit higher on him than actually the full kind of breadth of his tape last year, because he's got some great read and react ability, and he's great coming downhill. And what you need to be is in that position when you've got a lot of space either side of you. But I think people are certainly higher than him than necessarily. I think obviously you want to see Des King taking that. And I think Yidam and Sheffield, I think, are the two guys sitting there. Obviously, decent pedigree. We've picked them up from other programs. They've probably not fulfilled their potential. But I think unless you're actually there physically watching it, corner is probably one of the hardest positions to evaluate, particularly off camp reports, because it's so nuanced. There's a lot of stuff that goes into it. So I think there's a lot to be seen there. And I think that this is what's good about the preseason. The second and third string guys, you'll get to see probably for the majority of the second half on Saturday. I keep trying to say Sunday, but it is Saturday, so this week. And then the linebacker spot, I think it picks itself really, because you've got Kirko, as he's affectionately known as it, but Christian Kirksey, Grugier Hill, Christian Harris, Garrett Wallow, and I think Blake Cashman's been running with the ones, and I think that was probably predominantly the feedback you got from all the New York affiliates, that actually hell of a talented player just can't stay healthy. So looks like touchwood, he's been there, and I think the last spot goes to either Reeves, Maben or KPL, and I think that's you take 6 I think on this system. So I think it picks itself in many ways, this defense, pretty much. I think that you probably couldn't have said that last year. So when you actually run through the names, it does make you feel, albeit we're nowhere near we need to be in terms of competing for division titles and championships, but I think there is definitely an improvement and an improved shape and almost a vision you can outline when you sort of kind of go through 25 guys.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think, especially at least on the defense, I think the offense is a little less cut and dry. But the defense, it looks like everything's kind of falling into place. I would say the really main training camp battles I'm looking for in preseason positional battles is the free safety position. Is it Jonathan Owens? Is it someone else? It kind of looks like it's Jonathan Owens' job to lose. And then the nickel cornerback position. Is it Tavier Thomas? Is it Desmond King? I've heard Tavier's been getting more reps with the ones, but they have been competing for that pretty well, and it's an interesting story because they're like best friends from the same city, so it'll be tough now.
I think it's an underrated storyline, just the lack of depth at safety, to be honest with you, because I think you've got Petrie there, who you're going to ask a hell of a lot very early on in his career, put a lot on his plate. Yep. Eric Murray's never quite shown, despite having an albeit it was a bit of a technicality to smooth these cap dollars out, but it was an extension nonetheless. And Jonathan Rose has never really showed consistently that he is a starter caliber player. I know he gets a lot of great press because of who his wife is and all this kind of stuff, and he seems like a great guy, good locker room influence, but that, and I don't think Terrence Brooks can play. So if there is one spot on the defense I had outlined to pick up those waiver wire claims on cutdown, I think safety's a definitive one. And I think there's definitely enough guys in the mix at corner to see what you like, because obviously the Rasul Douglas example last year couldn't integrate him in the program, goes and have a hell of a season, gets paid in Green Bay. So a cornerback's a different animal to try and bring into your system, particularly in this one where there's a lot of tackling. You've got to keep your eyes downfield, you've got to be tracking the ball, and if guys aren't used to that and you can't get them from a transferable program who've had the same system pre-season, I think that's a real struggle to bring in. And I do think that 6th safety spot, because if you are relying on Cashman and KPL, I think there was definitely or Kevin Pierre-Lewis was definitely a guy who they didn't regret giving him the money. I don't think that's necessarily the right phrase, but certainly there was a lot of kind of angst that he didn't necessarily become what they wanted to do. So I think linebacker's another spot, Jordan, that potentially they could look at bringing somebody in as well.
Yeah, did you have Neville Hewitt on the 6? Because I know they love him.
Well, yeah, but I mean, do you remember watching him in the Miami game where he came in and he just looked slow? And that's when I actually had that in my notes, when you read training camp examples, when it said Neville Hewitt was good in pass coverage, he certainly didn't look like that at full NFL pro speed on a Sunday. So that when you see these, I think that's a good barometer of how accurate are these. So yeah, I don't have Hewitt only because I've watched them and you shouldn't probably dismiss guys. You should probably look at a bigger body of work. But there was enough times last year I just thought, I can't. If you want to be good, if you want to improve, he's the kind of guy you need to move on. He's the Terrence Mitchell of the linebacker group.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I was just curious because I know they like him and I know they kind of see him as like, if Kirksey goes down, like Hewitt's our Mike. And so that's a very important thing for Lovie. So I wouldn't be the decision I would make. I think Kevin Pierre-Lewis has more upside, like you do clearly. But if I were to like put my money on who they would keep, I think it would be Hewitt instead.
Yeah. And you kind of hope you kind of get away from some of that favourites kind of guys that are like locker room influences, because I mean, look, and I may be wrong, but there was too many times where I just watched them last year and thought, this guy ain't it if you want to be good in this league. But what's the kind of stuff you're looking for on what do you want to see from a preseason game? Obviously everybody comes out healthy, that's number one, but what's the kind of stuff you'll be looking for in terms of the team as a whole this weekend?
It's not about like the win or loss. I mean, I would love for them to be competitive, but at the end of the day, it's preseason football. A lot of this is mainly, and Lovie Smith talked to this too in one of his press conferences, a lot of it is mainly individual play and kind of breaking it down from a micro sense rather than a macro sense, because it's really hard for a team to come together right now and play as like a collective, cohesive unit in the first week of preseason. So I'm expecting things to be a bit ugly, but I want to really focus on the young guys, focus on the rookies. And Petrie, Stingley isn't playing, correct?
I wouldn't think he does now. I think they're still taking it nice and easy on him. Yeah,
so see how Petrie's doing on the defense. Is the game too fast for him? Is he at the right mental state? Where are they playing him? How much is it deep? How much is it in the box? Are they blitzing him? I really want to see how much they blitz him, because that's really one of his best skill sets. So I want to see that out of Petrie. I want to see how Pierce is looking as a runner. And then just the general offensive scheme with Mills. Like, what are they asking him to do? Is it a lot of these short underneath passes? Are they going to try and go deep? Because that's been kind of the latest development out of Davis Mills. Like early on, it sounded like he was really comfortable, very efficient, connecting on passes, looking good. And now these last few days, it's been, where are the deep balls? Where are the explosive plays? He can't push the ball downfield. He's not even going into the intermediate windows anymore. And today was his worst day. The Gm1, I don't know how to, it's not Bienemy, but BNM, I don't know exactly how to pronounce it. From the new ESPN Texans reporter, he was saying today that Davis Mills was 7 for 15 in the team periods. That's kind of ugly, especially for team periods. I would not cut it in a game, let alone in practices against your own team. So I don't mean to harp on one bad day. Obviously, every quarterback has one bad day, but it does speak to his greater depth of work that we saw as a rookie, is that there were occasional deep passes here and there, and he definitely got better at it later in the season. But for the most part, a lot of it was checkdowns, underneath stuff, garbage time, where defense is backing way off, and he's just taking these underneath completions to kind of boost up some of those stats. So that's really what I'll be looking for at preseason.
Yeah, and I think you're right, because I mean there'll be so many substitutions. The sort of cohesion of the game often fritters pretty quickly right into the second half, and I think and I wouldn't necessarily rule out playing Mills a full quarter. And I think obviously you've got to be careful because we said injuries, but ultimately reps is his best friend at the minute. Always reminds me with in the Hard Knocks when Clowney came back and Vrabel's shouting at him, telling him you need 1 million of these, and I think Mills isn't too far off that, if not actually more at that position. So. And I think you want to put him out there and give him enough time. Obviously, guys like Brandon Cooks and Tunsil, I don't expect to see, very limited at all, this offseason. We'll see what Lovie's kind of, philosophy is on that. He may well want to give guys some time because, he came from the era where, guys played, predominantly, 3/4 of the game in game 3. Now we're obviously down to 3 games in this new 17 league year. So, yeah, we'll see who we are on that. I'm interested to see what they do at tight end with Auclair going down. That looks a really, really weak spot at the minute, I think, if not the weakest. And everybody wants to see Pierce at running back, I think, just to get a couple of flashes of what he looks like, because, I think that he was one of the kind of, you get those guys later in rounds just because of the position he played. And in the backup offensive line guys, this one's that I like watching the most in preseason. What does Austin Deculus look like? Is Charlie Heck there? Have we got cover for the centre spot? Because Justin Britt, with all the best will in the world, I've never been a huge fan, but I think not only because nothing particularly to do with him, I just think at the stage of his career now, he's not necessarily there. It's the same, and it could be the same with AJ Cann this year as well. So what are these backup guys going to look like? Because we might have to lean on them, if injury history of those two guys alone have taught us anything, 2 of which are expected to be starters. So let's see what those guys have got, I think, and Yeah, and let's see if just young guys can make plays, and they might not make the team here. They might make the team somewhere else. But good to have football back, I think, Jordan, definitely, to actually watch a real game, because it's there's only so much you can make of these practices if you're not actually there and trusting your own eye, or you trust certain people. But in terms of this defense, what do you think is the likely outcome, or what's the ideal outcome? And we'll take it back from there. But this defense this year, what do you think? What do you think Lovie will call a good season, a step forward? Because we all know he's got another year to improve it, just because of the context in which he was hired. But what do you think good looks like for the Texas D 2022?
I guess it's really just about getting better from last year. In terms of like where they would want to be in terms of maybe points per game or whatnot, like I think you'd want to get out of that bottom 10 and maybe into somewhere where you're maybe the 20th best scoring defense, 18th best scoring defense, something like that. And then the same can be said for their pass defense. I think their rush defense I think you're happy if you're around maybe 22, 24, 25, like that's probably a good ranking for you. But I think also in terms of success is further than just like the scoring and whatnot and how many yards per game you give up. It's how can you get after the quarterback? I think that's really always going to be Lovie's priority. Can you make the quarterback uncomfortable? And so a lot of that rests on the defensive line, and a lot of that rests also on Lovie and his schematics. So we'll see. It'll be interesting, man. This defense has got some more talent, and they've got some young talent. So I'm excited to see how it comes all together.
Who gets the Shaq Lawson Award this year? Biggest disappointment? They might even not even make it through camp, but who's the guy who may not live up to expectations?
Man.
I've got one for
That's
you.
Tough.
I think people
okay,
might be
you
sure.
You go first.
Steven Nelson.
Yeah. I think Steven Nelson is getting a lot of hype right now, and he's always been just kind of a cornerback too.
Yep.
And I think it'll be even tougher when you've got a rookie across from you. And so I could see that for sure. I would say him, or it's not even that the expectations are high. I just don't think Christian Kirksey's a very good player.
Yeah.
Like he looks fine in the box score, but if you watch the games, this man makes so many mistakes in terms of mental errors and putting himself out of position.
His depth and coverage at times is not good.
Exactly.
No, I think that's clear. You don't have to watch too much tape to kind of pick that up. Yeah, I think Nelson, in a similar way that Justin Reed was penalised through no fault of his own, but the rotation on the back end, he's trying to cover, he's trying to direct traffic, he's trying to do too much. He's got a rookie playing next to him, he's got a rookie safety, he's got a safety number 2 next to him that he doesn't necessarily know who it is, and certainly not got a lot of established game film in this league. I think his potential one. They're MVP of the defense.
MVP. I feel like the safe play is Cameron Grugier-Hill or Jonathan Grenard. Grugier-Hill was statistically, I would say, the most like well-rounded player last year for us. Grenard had the flashy sacks. But so I think it would be between one of those two. I would love to say Petrie, but it's a rookie, so I just want to temper expectations there. Man, I'll go with Grenard. Let's say he takes that third year step, becomes a 9, 10, 11 sack guy, and also gets into the backfield more for tackle for losses and really drives that D line.
Yeah. And the most improved or biggest surprise of the season?
Biggest surprise of the season.
My one's Roy Lopez.
That's what I was going to go with as well.
There you go. Yeah. Sorry, I'm still that one off you. I think him in between and Rashad Green, I think it might surprise a lot of people. I think Green, because he's got film tape, he went to USC, he was a big prospect, 20 sacks in his final season in college. Never quite lived up to that. But certainly I think he's got a lot of potential to be versatile, because I think when you get a go at a different lineman across from you inside and out, it gives you more opportunity to keep things fresh at the point of attack. Whereas if you're just off the right end all game, it can bring familiarity, get more locked up more just by commonality of what you're trying to do. But yeah, I think what two of those guys could hopefully, because we're going to need it up front, definitely. Have you got a game you're going to this year, Jordan? You got any booked up, or anyone you're looking forward to the most, or what you looking forward to this season?
I'm really looking forward to is going to the Vegas game. I don't know if I'm going to be able to pull it together because tickets are insane. I can figure out the flight. I can cover that, but tickets right now are absolutely insane. So I need to figure that part out. It would either be that or the Cleveland game, of course, in Houston. Those are the two I got circled for sure. What about you, man?
Yeah, I think so. I've not got any travel plans sorted out yet this year, but I think I need to try and kind of get on top of that. But yeah, I think the Vegas one, I think it's just the money you spend when you're there. I think that's the issue. But yeah, I think from an atmosphere point of view, and we've not talked Watson because I don't want to talk about it again until it's definitive, if it'll ever be definitive before before the first snap of the season. But yeah, that from an atmosphere point of view, it'd be quite might be quite testy, to say the least. But football's back and we're looking forward to it, I think, and it's good to be in a position where you can see a path to development, you can see a path to improvement, but that's going to start and end probably with the support and the improvement that Mr. Davis Mills makes. So a lot to be seen. We'll definitely speak again this season, Jordan, but thank you very much for your time once again, mate. Much appreciated.
Thank you for having me as always, man. It's always a great time talking ball with you.